Welcome to Deciphering Growth, the show that explores mental health from every angle. We bring you conversations with personal opinions, stories, and practical tips. We aim to break down the stigma and help you live your best life. So please sit back and let's dive in. Before we begin, we want to remind our listeners that this podcast represents the opinions of Tiffany Graves, Eric Stone, and the show's guests. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Please consult a healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed are our own and do not represent those of our workplaces. Listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content does not establish a doctor-patient relationship.
All right, we are back and it is late and we are feeling ways.
It is late, but our passion does not wane, but we are tired. I know, Tiffany, you just moved, and I am starting a new commitment with my time. So I know we're both feeling very, is winded the right word? That's the nicer word, isn't it?
I think humanly stressed.
Yeah, humanly stretched is what I was gonna say. So stressed is nice, but we are excited to be here. We definitely want to prioritize this, even in a season of just transitions. Life is a transition. The only thing that is constant is that things do change. A quick aside, as a couple and relationship therapist, I am often asked, well, hey, they changed. It's their fault. There's a problem or whatever it may be. All of us change all the time. I am not the same I was a year ago, last week, or a month ago, and that is the same for
It's
relationships.
so fascinating to me when I think about it. Anyway, oh my gosh, I can't not side tangent full on Unleashed today. I read a book
If
about
you tell me, if you say Twilight, I will leave, and this is
no,
gonna be where the
no.
recording's done. But if you say Twilight, I respect you, but I will be gone. I'm gonna be like, my internet. Oh no.
No, it was a book about the brain, and it talked about how how our experiences that we technically experience are delayed.
I just love that you said the brain, where it's like, why did I guess Twilight when that makes way more sense that that would be what you enjoy, Tiffany, with your off time is
Um,
reading about the brain.
but yeah, it was a little, my brain was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, we're talking about experiences, and like, it was a whole chapter on how like our mirror neurons and neurons in general work. And by the time we actually experience something, it's already like technically gone. But our brain works in such a fascinating capacity to make it feel like it's here and now.
Oh.
It's I won't go too far into the brain, but it's just so fascinating.
I mean, I don't know, Tiffany. If you want to go on the brain, I will listen, but I don't know how much I can help you in. Tiffany is definitely our brain expert on the podcast.
I think people might get bored if I go too far in the brain.
I don't know. I feel like there's got to be a few fans, like of. No, I'm just teasing. Well, we're very open. This is one of the things that we wanted to kind of get into a little bit is like trauma for youth and teens specifically, and maybe some of the challenges that come up with self-medication, coping of trauma for adolescents. And so I'll be kind of speaking a little bit more about substance use, and where that comes into play. And Tiffany, um,
Well, of
I will
course, we're
say it
talking
without,
about the brain.
it will be Tiffany talking about the brain. That's true. Um, sorry, Tiffany. It was just we're gonna get through this, because we're excited to be here, and also we're a little slap happy, and that's okay. So if you will be talking about the brain. but it is something we're both pretty professionally and personally invested in, so definitely don't want to make light about that. I don't know how like triggering this episode may be, but I'll just offer a slight heads up that like we will be talking about like real examples of like real cases. And what I mean to say is that we will be like talking about things we've noticed or like the parts that kind of make this real. So the only reason I feel like we should just give that heads up is if you know you're dealing with a personal situation with this may just not be the content to consume today, and we take no offense. So just if you're in that place, maybe come back a different time, but we are excited for this discussion. So Tiffany, is there any place you'd like to start us off with today?
I think I just kind of wanted to start us off with looking at the adolescent brain development and trauma and kind of what can like lead us into some of these things that we're talking about, like why substance use can become appealing and some of those risky behaviors that we see escalate in adolescents that have experienced trauma. So that being said, teen brain is our critical period of neuroplasticity, especially your prefrontal cortex. This is your decision making, your impulse control. In the limbic system, this is your emotional reactivity and reward processing. All of this is in its heightened developmental peakness. Trauma, however, can overactivate the amygdala, which heightens fear responses and hypervigilance, while underdeveloping the prefrontal cortex, weakening emotional regulation and executive functioning. That being said, that means trauma can overactivate someone's brain in such a way it causes underdevelopment in your decision making and impulse control. Adolescents rely heavily on the nucleus accumbens, fancy brain word, for risk reward decisions, making them more prone to sensation seeking behaviors when stressed out. More big words, myelinian and synaptic pruning are often disrupted by chronic stress and cortisol exposure, which can alter long-term connectivity. So again, just saying that trauma can like prune some of those neural connections in a way that like disrupts how someone can effectively make long-term connections that allow them to cope in a healthy way. Your HPA axis dysregulation. I'm so excited I can't talk. Teens exposed to early adversity often have a sensitized hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, your HPA, which just means your higher baseline cortisol or blunted responses leads into poor stress tolerance. Repeated traumas build wear and tear, essentially, on all of these developing systems. Keep in mind, all of these systems are in their prime. They're supposed to be developing. But repeated trauma can develop wear and tear on these systems, making adolescents more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, inflammatory illnesses, and many other issues. This regulation can often manifest in teenagers as explosive anger or shutting down, i.e., our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses can be exaggerated. It can be manifested as a sleep disruption. So it can impact memory consolidation. You can have excessive sleep, little to no sleep, crazy circadian rhythms. And it can also cause difficulty distinguishing between real and perceived threats, which just means our anxiety is all out of whack. That leads us into looking at why substance use can become appealing. Trauma ultimately primes the brain for dopamine-seeking behaviors. Substances artificially boost dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which compensates for a chronically underactive reward system. Alcohol, cannabis, nicotine, and stimulants can feel like shortcuts to that regulation in a dysfunctional nervous system. Trauma-exposed teens often use substances as a way to numb or experience hyperarousal or to self-activate hypoarousal. Essentially, they're using these substances to help develop and feel things in their brain that their underdeveloped brain like can't feel due to exposure to trauma. So yeah, so ultimately substances can hijack neurodevelopmental pathways, locking in place maladaptive coping skills that was laid out by experienced trauma in developing adolescent brains. And I'm gonna toss it to Eric so you can talk a little bit more about what that looks like from a substance use perspective.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, for all the science. I really feel like that was very
Science.
science. I'll work on my singing for you, but we can't really have the art without the science. If not, it's just a bunch of therapists kind of winging it, or people being like, "Hey, this is what my gut thinks," which I definitely want to honor everyone's like inner tuition and things, and also like that usually is not sufficient for some of the things we're talking. So thank you, Tiffany. Genuinely, I don't want you to get roasted too much by me. And
Lay
so,
it on. It's okay.
well, you heard it on the record, folks. So if you hear it later, I will call back. But no, when we're talking about youth substance use, like we just need to kind of talk about like it's very prevalent. I There's just a huge number of people who don't have access to great health information, don't have access to proper coping skills. So it's as much as we challenge the stigma of therapy, um, it still exists, and it's just easier to vape, it's easier to smoke, it's easier to drink, it's easier to consume a substance than it is to maybe go to therapy and talk about some things that are very unpleasant. So about 8.5% in 2023 of the adolescent population, 12 to 17, suffered from a substance use disorder. So that's about 2.2 million teens. So I'm not going to try to round up, but like one in 10 having a substance use problem is a lot. So if you're at your religious community, you're in your neighborhood, there's 10 teenagers. Like, I want to be specific. When we say substance use disorder, we don't mean like had alcohol at a wedding once. We don't mean like, oh, I smoked weed one time. Like, we're talking about like a substance use disorder. That's a very specific criteria. There has to be a lot more than just I've tried this or I've done this kind of thing. Um, so I think one of the challenges a lot of the time is like, how do we kind of know what to look for? So the first thing would just be I think we all probably are on the same page about this, but just being specific, any consumption of alcohol, cannabis, any medication that's not prescribed by a doctor, that is self-medication. So it doesn't matter if, like, well, we all have ADHD in my family, I feel better, my partner feels better when we have cannabis. Like, that doesn't mean that your child should also be doing that. I don't want to go too far off, but all this to say a lot of people get very defensive when this topic comes up. Like, don't tell me how to parent my kid. Don't tell me like what I'm allowed to do. But I don't want to be like, sometimes I do want to be spicy, but like legitimately, if there was a teenager testing positive for a substance, that's a CPS case, that's the JFS case, like, they're not supposed to be using those substances or consuming those, so, like, that is what happens, so especially we're talking about school, there's a lot of things that mess with the brain chemistry, like Tiffany is talking about, but this art part of this, maybe beyond the science, is, like, when you're leaning into substances to be that coping skill, you're not going to develop those other ones. So I'm not going to learn meditation. I'm not going to learn other outlets to manage my stress because I have found something that gives me what I want, what I need, and that is like drinking or smoking. And I keep saying smoking specifically cannabis because a lot of teenagers would not mess with nicotine, but if you ask them about vaping, they wouldn't blink, whether that's nicotine or cannabis. So, Tiffany, I guess what comes to mind for you when you think about just the availability of substances, even for teenagers?
Ugh, it is. Oh, I guess I can't factually say because I don't work in the field like you as an expert, but it seems like substances are extremely accessible.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone would be familiar with like the Marlboro Man, just like this really cool looking
Is
guy.
he a thing still?
Well, not that version, but if you look back at like the 1950s tobacco ads, they basically do what happens now, where a lot of influencers are hired to utilize some products, advertise, and they just so happen to be the influencers that are really popular with teenagers. And isn't that such an interesting coincidence? It legally has to be a coincidence because if not, that's targeting minors for substances they should not be having. Um,
Or it is or what are they? Is it a conundrum where it's like it can't be this, but we know it's this, but we can't actually acknowledge it's this thing? I'm at a loss for what that is.
I mean, I feel like I'm in a conundrum. No, I'm just kidding. But it's just one of those things that, like, I don't think it's a very, someone knows what they're doing. I'm not trying to slander anything, but it's one of those things that if you're paying attention, you can see it's people who would be defined as objectively attractive. It's people who are famous. It's people, it's like they're doing really cool things in cars or adventure and travel, and oh, they have a vape. Jewel is one that
Oh
I
my
can't
god.
tell about. I There's a lot about Jewel, but like I just want to say for just 1 second, like you legitimately cannot talk about what I'm talking about, the advertising, because it sounds like Eric, you're just a little bit paranoid. You're overhyping this, but like legitimately, Jewel, the e-vape, supposed to be nicotine cessation, but we all know that that's not what it became, was sending Jewel marketing people. You just can't, like, you legitimately can't make this up. Was sending marketing people into schools to talk about smoking cessation. Uh, but what they did is they would bring Juuls in and say, "This is a Juul. Look how cool it is. Don't ever do it. Here's some coupons." I mean, I don't
What a
want to say it was
wonderful
coupon.
reverse psychology.
It
Don't
wasn't
do
really
this thing.
coupons. I think legitimately what they did was they were legitimately like giving them like merch and things. It was like jewel. Like I mean, it's like if Marlboro had a nicotine sensation programming. It's like, well, that's kind of morally wrong. Maybe we shouldn't do that. That combo did not obviously happen.
It
Uh,
reminds us, you guys should all watch the Jewel. I don't think it's called Jewel, but it's about the Jewel creation and like the unethics of it on documentary on Netflix. Not sponsored, but great documentary.
if you're interested in any of this stuff, yeah, I would recommend. I mean, it's very twisted. It's like, hey, we can have them be customers a lot longer if they start young. And it's just it is twisted in that way. Um, I just talked about this that you could go. Can a teenager go and get alcohol at any gas station or corner? I sure hope not. I don't think they can. But we all know that if
We all know they
someone
can't.
they can't do it everywhere. But I think it would be irresponsible to say that can't happen. When I'm sure someone knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. Um, it's just tough. So I would just say, kind of getting a little more specific, it's just more available. It's more accessible. Therapy, you have to go find somebody that may be old, like Tiffany and I. It's a small joke, and they don't want to talk to us. It may not even be their idea. So, I mean, when we talk about substance use, we talk about like, oh, someone needs to be ready to change. They need to want the change, but like, not everybody does. So it's like, okay, well, what are we doing in a situation like that if somebody doesn't want to
Mhm.
change?
That makes me laugh. I was just telling someone the other day, I was like, I was in goodness, I had middle school in the 2000s, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" I was like, "Yeah, I know, I'm a dinosaur."
There's like some TikTok trend with like who's old, and it's like anyone born after 2004 is old, and it's like, ouch, ouch.
We're ancient then.
We are like the second age of dinosaurs, if that's the first age. Um, gosh. So it's a very available thing, and I think honestly, like we're seeking that dopamine, we're seeking that release, and legitimately, you will get a release from consuming substances or drinking alcohol. Um, and
Yeah,
if you're already in a place where you can't handle mood regulation or weighing out certain decisions, like that's a very dangerous store for a lot of people.
yeah. And I just want to highlight too that teens with trauma histories are more likely to engage in these reckless behaviors, but like it's not like a like it's not a causation. Like because you had trauma, you are therefore doing these things. Um, it just
Yeah,
puts them at
it's
a
an
higher risk.
yeah, it's a higher risk is the right way to say that. It's a higher risk that they would be more apt to use something like substances to cope than maybe someone with a lower adverse childhood experience for or a lower level of trauma.
Yeah. And like if we're looking at youth who have a 4+ ACEs higher, they're 7 times more likely to misuse alcohol and 10 times more likely to inject some form of drug than those who have 0 ACEs score. And that's all because they have an underengaged prefrontal cortex, which means they have poorer risk evaluation. They have an overactive amygdala, which means their emotional decisions dominate over the rational ones. And their reward system is hijacking them. They're trying to live in the now without the regard for the long-term consequences. That's not to say that they are at fault. It's just to say they were born with this shitty stack of cards.
And I would just maybe add that judgment rarely helps these situations. So going to someone who's like, "Hey, you have a problem. Hey, you're an embarrassment," or "Hey, this, hey, that." Like, it's not helpful. The scared straight. I know I've said this on this show multiple times, but like, if I could just get rid of the show intervention, I would delete it from everyone's memory. That show makes people think things that are like legitimately not true. Like,
Oh my
it,
gosh. I apologize for interrupting you, but that reminded me, I just watched a Netflix show where I can't remember if it's based on real story or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if it is, where they kidnap these teens in the middle of the night. People kidnap these teens
yeah.
and like take them to these like therapy
Mhm.
places. And I'm like, how traumatic is this to just be kidnapped in the middle of the night by your parents? Your parents call someone to come kidnap you.
Yeah, and yeah, and they like watch it happen to. It's terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
crazy.
I don't know how to top that, to be honest. Like, I really don't. So I'm just kind of like, it's it's tough. I think a lot of this is tough, and I think a lot of people think they understand it. So one thing I do want to say, do you have to have lived experience to fully understand this? No. Does it help? Absolutely. Like, so I want to just make sure, like, I am not personally in recovery. Um, that does not mean that I can't help someone in recovery, but it does mean that, hey, I can't just come in and pretend like I get everything that this person could have gone through, like, just right off the bat. And I think that's just one thing I would like to encourage people is like, don't assume like what someone's dealing with or options could be. I think that would be a mistake that could be a very easy trap for a lot of people to fall into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing I kind of wanted to touch on is that emotional dysregulation that you might see in teens. Teens often oscillate. I wish I could like word today. Teens may oscillate or fluctuate between hyperarousal, So that panic, that rage, that impulsivity, and hypoarousal, that withdrawal, that dissociation, that numbness. Trauma can reduce functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, making it harder to hit the brakes on emotions. So it seems like they can go from a 0 to 100 really quickly. Chronic stress can also shrink the hippocampal volume, impairing memory integration and learning. So they can get stuck in an emotional reactivity cycle. And this is a really important one. Dysregulation from trauma can mimic or co-occur with ADHD, ODD, depression, or bipolar disorder, which can lead to misdiagnosis of trauma if it isn't considered. And I want to highlight this because it's really important that if you're not considering trauma as a mimicry for some of these things that you're seeing, you could end up like medicating someone who doesn't need medication and making their journey like much more complicated.
And there are certainly a lot of people who would like to get access to medications. And one of the things I'll be honest about that is concerning with some of this is like, there's a lot of things out on TikTok. Half of it is correct, half of it is wrong. And that is not what Tiffany and I are allowed to do as therapists is 50-50 shot. That's a coin flip. That's really, really dangerous, especially when some of these disorders have lifelong meaning associated with them.
Yeah. And I guess the kind of the last thing for me to kind of point to put out there is, this is going to sound bizarre, but we want to, on some level, normalize a teen's bad behavior because it might just be their adaptive survival wiring and not purposeful defiance. That being said, when I say normalize, we also do want to look at all the moving parts here. It's not like a zoom in, like, oh, they're behaving terribly, it must be trauma. We really have to like zoom out and look at the bigger picture to determine like, is this an adaptive process, or is it something more like selective? Really want to encourage parents, caregivers, guardians to view outburst or substance use as signals of unmet regulation needs rather than moral failings of a teenager. Not always, but I would bet a pretty penny that more often than not, when a teenager is engaging in some form of substance use, there's a need that's not being met and they're trying to meet it in the best way that they know how with the little amount of skills that we give them. And lastly, stress the importance of early intervention and not shitty televised interventions, but actually looking at brain plasticity and how looking at having a safe space can help heal. And that's highly possible in adolescence because, as I mentioned at the beginning, you are in the primal developmental stages with the most, what's the word I want to use? With the most critical period of neuroplasticity. So this is the point in our development where our neuroplasticity is at its greatest. So there is all kinds of possibilities in like healing happening. Not to say that you can't heal later in life, but why not do it earlier rather than later?
It makes sense to keep on with this and keep going, but I appreciate you, Tiffany, with some of these insights. It's like I think this is something I'd like to be an ongoing discussion on our podcast because it's like it's nothing that's going away, sad to say. It's something that's going to be there. And I think maybe we just need to keep this door open for discussion.
Sounds good. Any last minute notes before I wrap us up?
Just try not to judge. It's easy to judge. It's harder to sit and understand why someone may be churning to what they're churning to. So that's all I would say.
Yeah. And I guess the two things I want to leave you guys with is trauma isn't destiny. While early adversity can rewire the adolescent brain toward risk and dysregulation, supportive relationships and interventions can rewire it back towards resilience. And the story isn't about damage, but plasticity, the ability to reroute, rebuild, and grow new pathways of safety, regulation and hope is what we want to instill in our teenagers and our adolescents. That being said, guys, we appreciate you for joining us as always, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Deciphering Growth. We hope you found our conversation helpful and insightful. Subscribe to our podcast for more episodes and check out our Patreon for more content. Don't hesitate to contact us on social media if you have any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep growing.